I was muted for 1 minute and 10 seconds. I apologize. So that's probably going to have a lot of people just click away because after a minute or so, there we go. 10 seconds. I apologize. Alright, now my microphone is on. We've got a lot to get into today, and I will begin with coup feared in Bolivia. Coup in the making feared in Bolivia's capital after military vehicles rammed government palace. La Paz, Bolivia. Armored vehicles rammed into the doors of Bolivia's government palace Wednesday as a top government official warned of a coup attempt, and President Luis Arce said irregular development of troops was taking place in the capital. Video on Bolivian television showed Arce confronting the general commander of the army, Juan Jose Zuniga, in the palace hallway. I am your captain, and I order you to withdraw your soldiers, and I will not allow this insubordination. Before entering the government building, Zuniga told journalists in the plaza, surely soon there will be a new cabinet of ministers. Our country, our state cannot go on like this. In a message on his X account, Arce called for democracy to be respected. It came as Bolivian television showed 2 tanks and a number of men in military uniform in front of the government palace. We cannot allow once again coup attempts to take the lives of Bolivians, he said from inside the palace, surrounded by government officials in a video message sent by 2 news outlets. Former President Evo Morales, also in a message on X, denounced the movement of the military in the Murillo Square outside the palace, calling it a coup in the making. Maria Nela Prada, minister of the presidency and a top Bolivian official, called it an attempted coup d'etat. The people are on alert to defend democracy, she said to the local television station Red Uno. The incident was met with a wave of outrage by other regional leaders, including the Organization of American States, Gabriel Boric, the president of neighboring Chile, Honduras' leader, and former Bolivian leaders. Bolivia, a country of 12 million people, has seen intensifying protests in recent months over the economy's precipitous decline from one of the continent's fastest growing 2 decades ago to one of the most crisis-stricken. The country has also seen a high-profile rift at the highest levels of the governing party. Arce and his one-time ally, leftist icon and former President Morales, have been battling for the future of Bolivia's splintering movement for socialism, known by its Spanish acronym MAS, ahead of elections in 2025. This was PBS News. This is from The Guardian. Sudan's warring factions using starvation as weapon, experts say. Special rapporteurs working for UN warn famine is imminent and over 25 million people need urgent help. Human rights experts working for the United Nations have accused Sudan's warring parties of using starvation as a war weapon amid mounting warnings of imminent famine in the African country. Sudan plunged into chaos in April last year when simmering tensions between the country's military and a notorious paramilitary group, the Rapid Support Forces (RSF), exploded into open fighting in the capital Khartoum and elsewhere in the country. In 14 months of fighting, more than 14,000 people have been killed and 33,000 others wounded or injured, according to the UN, but rights activists say the toll could be much higher. There have been widespread reports of sexual violence and other atrocities that rights groups say amount to war crimes and crimes against humanity. Conflict created the world's largest displacement crisis, with more than 11 million people forced to flee their homes. Both the Sudanese armed forces and the RSF are using food as a weapon in starving civilians, the experts said. The extent of hunger and displacement we see in Sudan today is unprecedented and never witnessed before. Neither the military nor the RSF returned phone calls seeking comment. The experts warned that famine was imminent, as humanitarian aid has been blocked and harvest season disrupted by war. They said more than 25 million civilians in Sudan and those who fled the country were being starved and needed urgent humanitarian assistance. A report by the Clinical Dial Institute think tank said last month that about 2.5 million people in Sudan could die from hunger by the end of September, with about 15% of the population in the regions of Darfur and Kordofan probably being the worst affected. The independent experts said local efforts in response to Sudan's hunger crisis had been hampered by unprecedented violence and targeted attacks on civil society and local responders. Dozens of activists and local volunteers have been arrested, threatened, and prosecuted in recent weeks, they said. The deliberate targeting of humanitarian workers and local volunteers has undermined aid operations, putting millions of people at further risk of starvation, they said. Local responders are risking their health and lives and working across battle lines. They urged both sides to stop blocking, looting, and exploiting humanitarian assistance. The experts are part of the UN Special Procedures, which is the largest body of independent experts in the organization's human rights system. The fighting has in recent months centered around El Fasser, the capital of North Darfur State, trapping hundreds of thousands of civilians. At least 143,000 people have been forced to flee the city over the past 3 months, according to the UN. The United Nations Security Council earlier this month demanded the RSF immediately end its siege of the city, which is the military's last stronghold in the sprawling Darfur region. Flooding on the Blue Earth River caused an abutment of the Rapidan Dam to partially fail on Monday morning and remains in imminent failure condition. On Tuesday morning, Blue Earth County Public Works Director Ryan Bilgis said the breach threat has diminished, though officials are still concerned because the dam was built on sandstone bedrock that can further erode. Bilgis says the dam itself was not breached. Instead, he described it as a partial failure of the west abutment. The structure is intact, but water continues to flow around it, eroding the slope and forcing evacuation of the family homeowners of the Rapidan Dam store. Late Tuesday night, most of the iconic home collapsed into the river. Blue Earth County Sheriff Jeff Orso said the water level in a catastrophic event would not be that significant. If there was a full collapse of the dam, county leaders say the river could rise another 2 feet or so. There is a levee system protecting the city, and officials are confident it will hold up. Officials say the bridges spanning county roads 33 and 90 are being closely monitored for debris passing downstream and may be closed if needed. Exxon Energy says it has been fortifying several other facilities downriver with sandbags and barriers to protect them if the dam becomes compromised and reaches the substations. Hundreds of people were without power on Monday night. Exxon says it restored power to about 600 homes and businesses near the dam around midnight. The Blue Earth River begins in northern Iowa and meets with the river's West Branch in Faribault County in southern Minnesota, according to the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency. From there, it flows 108 miles north past the cities of Blue Earth, Winnebago, and Vernon Center to Mankato, where it enters the Minnesota River. There are 21 cities in that watershed, of which Mankato and Fairmount are the largest. The National Inventory of Dams rated the Rapidan Dam in poor condition as of April 2023, classifying its hazard potential as significant. The Army Corps of Engineers and the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission are still assessing the damage. This is that house that's music festival blamed for gazelle deaths in Spain. 4 gazelles have died at a conservation center in the Spanish town of Almeria after a nearby music festival. The center's veterinarian told the BBC the animals were agitated during Saturday's concert, but the worst consequences happened the day after as gazelles ran into walls, breaking their neck and legs. Dr. Sonoya Dominguez from EZA was with the animals during the concert on Saturday night. Her team had previously asked authorities to move the festival to a different venue. But Almeria Cultura, the town's cultural hub, defended its decision to go ahead with the event, saying in a statement on X that concerts did not exceed 65 decibels on the outer wall of the center. "We can measure decibels, but it's not the main aspect," the conservation center's vet said, explaining that the animals are more sensitive than humans to the sound and vibration. "It's not just a question of numbers or decibels," Dr. Dominguez added. Local authorities lamented the deaths, but said the center had come to very hasty conclusions when there are other extenuating factors to be considered. Dr. Dominguez said the animals are particularly sensitive at this time of year because it is their breeding season. She added that because gazelles are prey in their natural habitats, their way to get away from what scares them in nature is to run away. In doing this, she said, some of the animals sustain traumatic injuries. Dr. Dominguez said on a day-old calf also died because her mother was very nervous and didn't attend to them. The center's director, Teresa Albagar, said it is frustrating that the Almeria City Council has not shown the sense of precaution of a public administration regarding the protection of the center's specimen. Dr. Dominguez said the center has asked the city's authorities to move future events to a new place so animals are not disturbed, but have not yet had a response. All animals at the conservation center are endangered in their original habitats in northern Africa, and the center plays a vital role in preserving biodiversity worldwide, Dr. Dominguez said. The animals are endangered and classified as vulnerable according to the International Union for Conservation of Nature, the IUCN. Established in 1964, the IUCN's Red List of threatened species has evolved to become the world's most comprehensive information source on the global conservation status of animal, fungi, and plant species. One Barbary sheep was also among the animals who died after the concert. It's very frustrating that authorities can't see the risks, Dr. Dominguez told the BBC. The BBC has contacted Almeria Cultura for comment. The waves of sound caused these gazelles to panic. Russia puts Wall Street Journal reporter Evan Gershkovich on trial for espionage. Gershkovich, who faces up to 20 years in prison on charges U.S. rejects to return to court August 13th. Wall Street Journal reporter Evan Gershkovich went on trial behind closed doors in Yekaterinburg on Wednesday, 15 months after his arrest in the Russian city on espionage charges that he, his employer, and the U.S. government vehemently deny. The 32-year-old journalist appeared in court in a glass defendant's cage, his head shaved since his last court appearance, while wearing a black and blue plaid shirt. Journalists were allowed into the courtroom for a few minutes before the proceedings were closed. The next hearing for Gershkovich was set for August 13th, court officials said. Jay Conte, executive vice president and general counsel for Dow Jones, publisher of the Journal, described the trial as a sham in an interview with the Associated Press. He was an accredited journalist doing journalism, and this is a sham trial, bogus charges that are completely trumped up. Accused of spying on secret military affairs, the American-born son of immigrants from the USSR, Gershkovich, was arrested on March 29, 2023, and is the first Western journalist arrested on espionage charges in post-Soviet Russia. Gershkovich faces up to 20 years in prison if the court finds him guilty, which is almost certain. Russian courts convict more than 99% of the defendants who come before them, and prosecutors can appeal sentences that they regard as too lenient, and they can even appeal acquittals. With Gershkovich's trial being closed, few details of his case may become public, but the Russian Prosecutor General's office repeated an allegation Wednesday from earlier this month that the reporter is accused of gathering secret information on orders from the CIA about Yuraval Ganzavad, a plant about 150 kilometers north of Yekaterinburg that produces and repairs tanks and other military equipment. The U.S. Embassy in Russia said Wednesday in a statement that prosecutors still haven't produced any evidence to support the allegations. Russian authorities have failed to provide any evidence supporting the charges against him, failed to justify his continued detention, and failed to explain why Evans' work as a journalist constitutes a crime, the statement read. Gershkovich's arrest came about a year after Russian President Vladimir Putin pushed through laws that shield journalists, criminalizing criticism of what the Kremlin calls a special military operation in Ukraine, in statements seen as discrediting the military. Kremlin rejects Trump's claim. Gershkovich's case became an issue in the presidential race when Donald Trump, the presumptive Republican nominee again this year, said in May that he could easily get the journalist free. Putin will do that for me, but not for anyone else, said Trump, who received criticism even from some Republicans during his 2017 to 2021 term as president for praising the Russian leader and appearing to believe his claims over Washington intelligence agencies. The Kremlin, however, says it has not been in touch with Trump, and Putin's spokesperson Dmitry Peskov bristled at the attention given to possible exchange, saying these contacts must be carried out in total secrecy. Russia has not ruled out a prisoner exchange, including involving Gershkovich, and says that's not possible before a verdict in his case. U.S. President Joe Biden received some criticism for a prisoner swap 2 years ago that saw arms dealer Victor Bout released from a federal prison. In exchange, WNBA star Brittany Griner was freed early on a 9.5-year sentence for cannabis possession. Since the Ukraine war began, other American citizens have been detained in Russia. Also, Kamrasheva, a reporter with dual American-Russian citizenship for the U.S. government-funded Radio Liberty, Radio Free Europe, was arrested for an alleged violation of the law requiring so-called foreign agents to register. Another dual national, Los Angeles resident, Sania Carolina, is on trial, also in Yekaterinburg, on treason charges for alleging raising money for a Ukrainian organization that supplied arms and ammunition to Kiev. Paul Whelan, an American corporate security executive who was born in Ottawa, was arrested in Moscow for espionage in 2018 and is serving a 16-year sentence. Kenyan president scraps bill to raise taxes after violent protests leave 23 dead. William Ruto says he listened to the people of Kenya who gathered across the country to oppose the law. The Kenyan president, William Ruto, has withdrawn a bill to raise taxes a day after violent protests erupted around the country following its approval by Parliament. Ruto's surprise decision not to sign the finance bill came after violent clashes between police and protesters at the Kenyan Assembly and across the country left at least 23 people dead and scores wounded, according to medics. Listening keenly to the people of Kenya, who have said loudly that they want nothing to do with the Finance Bill 2024, I concede, and therefore I will not sign a 2024 Finance Bill, and it shall subsequently be withdrawn, he said in a press briefing in Nairobi. The climb down will be seen as a major setback for Ruto, who came to power vowing to help Kenyans cope with rising costs, but has seen much of the country led by youth united in opposition to his latest attempt at reforms. In an attempt to further diffuse the volatile situation, Ruto proposed a dialogue with young people, civil society, religious organizations, and professional bodies on the bill. He also directed austerity measures to reduce expenditure in his office, the executive, parliament, as well as the judiciary and county governments, to ensure that we do live within our means, respecting the very loud message that is coming from the people of Kenya. The move will be considered a victory for the week-old protest movement that grew from online condemnations of tax increases into mass rallies demanding a political overhaul in the most serious crisis of Ruto's 2-year-old presidency. Kenya, East Africa's largest economy and a pillar of peace in a relatively turbulent region, is reeling from Tuesday's protests. Thousands of people gathered in Nairobi, the capital, with some storming into parliament and other offices of government institutions and setting parts of them on fire. Police opened fire and shot tear gas on protesters. At least 23 people were killed and another 30 were being treated for bullet wounds, according to the Kenya Medical Association. Protests also took place in other cities and towns across the country. Last week, one person was killed and at least 200 others were injured in demonstrations, according to human rights groups Independent Policing Oversight Authority, Police Watchdog. In an unusual move, Kenya's Defense Minister Aden Duale on Tuesday announced the deployment of the military to support police in response to the security emergency caused by the ongoing violent protest. Kenya's High Court on Wednesday ordered the military deployment suspended after a challenge by the Kenya Law Society. Before backing down, Ruto had described Tuesday's events as treasonous and blamed the violence on criminals. On Wednesday, Ruto acknowledged deaths, calling it an unfortunate situation, and offered condolences. He said about 200 people had been wounded. The protests have been driven largely by youth-led digital activism, with young Kenyans using X, TikTok, and other platforms to oppose the bill, crowdfund, organize, and mobilize demonstrations. On Tuesday, non-governmental organizations said there had been 21 abductions and disappearances by officers over the past 24 hours, with some of the victims having been vocal on social media about the planned protests. Nicodemus Mendy, a researcher with the Institute for Security Studies in Nairobi, said lingering questions about those killed and injured during the protests, as well as those missing, could mean the protests continue. Protesters had earlier vowed to keep up with their demonstrations and messages on social media using the hashtag Tupatane Thursday or See You on Thursday in a mix of Swahili and English. Posts on social media had urged people to occupy State House, the President's office and residence on Thursday, and the local offices of the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund (IMF) on Friday. Heavily armed police patrolled the streets of Nairobi on Wednesday, which were quieter than usual. Edith Wanjiku, the mother of a teenager killed, told journalists at a morgue that the police who shot her 19-year-old son should be charged with murder because he had been unarmed. He had just completed school and was peacefully protesting, she said. Opposition leader Raila Odinga called for dialogue, asserting that Kenya's constitution had been suspended. Kenya cannot afford to kill its children just because the children are asking for food, jobs, and a listening ear, he said in a statement. A lot going on in Kenya. What else we got here? Biden issues blanket pardon to troops expelled from the military for their sexuality. President Joe Biden issued a blanket pardon on Wednesday morning to LGBTQI+ service members removed from the military because of their sexual orientation or gender identity. Biden said in a statement that he was righting an historic wrong by granting clemency to all troops expelled during the 60 years that the military explicitly banned consensual gay sex. Congress repealed that ban in 2013. White House officials say this move, announced during Pride Month, will affect about 2,000 veterans. The exact number of U.S. troops expelled over the years for their sexuality or gender identity isn't known, but advocates estimate that it's over 100,000. Commanders often used other ways to push gay troops out of the military, like issuing violations or offering a less than honorable discharge in lieu of court-martial, the formal legal proceeding of the military. This is about dignity, decency, and ensuring the culture of our armed forces reflect the values that make us an exceptional nation, Biden said in a statement. We have a sacred obligation to all of our service members, including our brave LGBTQI plus service members, to properly prepare and equip them when they are sent into harm's way, and to care for them and their families when they return home. Today, we are making progress in that pursuit. Conduct covered under the pardon includes those convicted of aggravated offenses based on consensual private conduct, persons age 18 or older. Those charged with an aggravated factor like sexual coercion or adultery are not covered in the pardon. And other than honorable discharge is more than a brand of shame. It strips veterans of automatic VA benefits and health care. It can be difficult to then procure a civilian job because employers often ask about military service and character of discharge when hiring. This pardon will remove a huge obstacle for thousands of veterans to get their military discharge upgraded with the Department of Defense, but that's still a long and difficult process. The Department of Veterans Affairs is able to grant benefits to many veterans with an other than honorable discharge in many cases. On Tuesday, VA Secretary Dennis McDonough addressed that question at a press conference. I do have a very specific message to every veteran, irrespective of their other than honorable discharges, which is, we want to work with you. My message is please come see us, he said. The Biden administration will still consider pardoning offenses charged to other LGBTQI plus individuals that do not fall under these guidelines on an expedited case-by-case basis, according to the proclamation. CDC issues dengue fever alert in the U.S. Total of 2,241 cases have been reported so far in the U.S., including 1,498 cases in the U.S. territory of Puerto Rico. The incidence of dengue fever globally has been the highest on record, including Brazil, South America. Mosquito bites. Avoid mosquito bites. Easier said than done. Okay. Exxon Suncor units lose bid to escape Boulder, Colorado's climate case. This is from Reuters. Nate Raymond, June 24th. ExxonMobil and subsidiaries of Suncor Energy have lost their bids to dismiss a lawsuit by Boulder, Colorado, alleging the energy companies contributed to climate change by concealing from the public the dangers of unchecked fossil fuel use. Boulder County District Court Judge Robert Gunning on Friday largely rejected the company's contention that Colorado's courts lack jurisdiction over them and that federal law trumped the state law claims asserted that by the city and its surrounding county. Gunning disagreed with the arguments by Exxon and the Suncor subsidiaries that federal law, including the Clean Air Act, preempted their state law claims to the extent that were seeking to regulate emissions and global oil production. The energy companies are arguing against the case the local government did not plead, Gunning said. So this action, the local governments are not attempting to litigate a policy solution to global climate change, limit fossil fuel use production, or control greenhouse gas emissions. He said instead they were seeking damages under Colorado tort law for harms and costs caused by the energy companies' actions and remediation of the hazards they were caused by public nuisance they created in their communities. Representatives for Exxon, Suncor, and Boulder did not respond to requests for comment. The ruling came after the U.S. Supreme Court last year rejected the company's efforts to move Boulder's 2018 lawsuit to federal court. It is one of the many such cases by state and local governments oil companies are facing nationally. Boulder's lawsuit alleges the companies knew for decades that burning fossil fuels would lead to climate change, but concealed from consumers in Colorado and elsewhere the truth about the dangers of their products and carbon emissions. The lawsuit accuses the companies of violating Colorado's consumer protection law and various state tort laws and creating a public nuisance that they should be held responsible for helping to mitigate. Texas-based Exxon and Canada's Suncor deny wrongdoing and argue their connections to Colorado were too remote for the state's courts to have jurisdictions over them in a case seeking to force them to compensate the city and county government for the effects of climate change on their communities. Exxon's lawyers argued that the global oil company could not have anticipated that in producing and selling fossil fuels, it could be sued over alleged harms caused by its products in Colorado. Gunning, though, said the U.S. Supreme Court rejected a similar argument in 2021 when it ruled against Ford Motors' bid to avoid facing product liability lawsuits filed in Montana and Minnesota, states in which it marketed its products. The judge agreed with Suncor's lawyers that only some of the U.S. subsidiaries involving in refining petroleum in Colorado and not the Canada-based parent company itself could be sued in the state, citing a lack of jurisdiction. That's gonna take forever. Climate change to make costs soar. This is from Wired, Nitish Pawa. Everything's about to get hell of a lot more expensive due to climate change. Intensifying hurricanes, floods, and heat waves are wreaking havoc across the U.S. and on everyone's bank accounts. This story originally appeared on Slate and is part of the Climate Desk collaboration. If you're one of the millions of Americans worried about your pocketbooks and the general cost of living, you might have picked up on some good news recently. Inflation has been really cooling off this summer as long sticky and long lamented food and energy prices continue to moderate. Some economic indicators remain stubborn, however, and they aren't likely to abate any time in the near future. No matter how long the Federal Reserve keeps interest rates high, what tweaks President Joe Biden makes to his trade policy, whether corporations decide themselves to slash prices on certain products, or whether COVID-battered supply chains finally get some long-needed fixes. Other grimmer recent headlines help to explain why. Hard rains from a tropical disruption in the Gulf have been battering Florida's southern regions for days, leading to a rare flash flood emergency. Another batch of storms is swirling near Texas at the moment and could form into a tropical depression, according to the forecast from the National Hurricane Center. Even if both states end up missing bigger storms now, it's likely only a matter of time before they are threatened again. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration predicts that the United States will see its worst hurricane season in decades this summer. Meanwhile, the heat waves that have enveloped Phoenix are intensifying to the point that some analysts are deeming it its latest conditions a Hurricane Katrina of heat. Where was I? Meanwhile, the heat waves that have enveloped Phoenix are intensifying to the point some analysts are deeming its conditions a Hurricane Katrina of heat. Spanning outward, the Midwest and Northeast are projected to get their own extreme heat warnings as early as next week, with energy demand set to skyrocket as people turn on their air conditioners. The country has already seen $11 billion disasters this year, including the tornadoes that slammed Iowa just weeks ago. Meanwhile, the already strapped Federal Emergency Management Agency faces a budgetary crisis, and sales of catastrophic bonds are at an all-time high. Now let's look at the inflation readings. One of the categories remaining stubbornly high, while others indicators shrink. Shelter and housing match as rents and insurance stayed hot, and still elevated interest rates make construction and mortgage costs even more prohibitive. On the energy front, motor fuel may be cheapening, but fuel and electricity for home use are still pricey. Auto insurance remains a driving outlier. As I noted back in April, not least because of insurance hiking premiums for cars, and especially disaster vulnerable regions like the South, the Southwest, and the coast. Look at what else is happening in those regions when it comes to home insurance. Providers are either retreating from or dramatically heightening their prices in states like California, Texas, Florida, and New Jersey, thanks to their unique susceptibility to climate change. These states have been supercharged extreme weather events like floods, rain bombs, heat waves, and droughts. National lawmakers fear that the insurance crises there may be ultimately wreak havoc on the broader real estate sector, but that's not the only worst case scenario they have to worry about. Agricultural yields for important commodities produced in these states, such as fruits, nuts, corn, sugar, veggies, and wheat, are withering thanks to punishing heat and soil nutrition depletion. The supply chains through which these products usually travel are thrown off course at varying points by storms that disrupt land and sea transportation. Preparation for those Preparation for these varying externalities requires supply chain middlemen and product sellers to anticipate consequential cost increases down the line and implement them sooner or later in order to cover their margins. You may have noticed some clear standouts among the contributors to May's inflation. Juices and frozen drinks, along with sugar and related substitutes. It's probably not a coincidence that Florida, a significant producer of both oranges and sugar, has seen extensive damage to those exports thanks to extreme weather patterns caused by climate change as well as invasive crop diseases. Economists expect that orange juice prices will stay elevated during this hot, rainy summer. It goes beyond groceries, though. It applies to every basic building block of modern life: labor, immigration, travel and materials for home building, transportation, power generation, and necessary appliances. Climate effects have been disrupting and raising the prices of timber, copper, and rubber. Even chocolate prices were skyrocketing not long ago thanks to climate change impacts on African cocoa bean crops. The outdoor workers supplying such necessities are experiencing adverse health impacts from the brutal weather, and the recent record-breaking influxes of migrants from vulnerable countries, which overall have been good for the U.S. economy, are in part a response to climate damages in their home nations. The climate price hikes show up in other ways as well. There's a lot of housing near the coast in the Gulf regions and the Northeast specifically. Americans love their beaches and their big houses. Turns out, even with generous monetary backstops from the federal government, it's expensive to build such elaborate manors and keep having to rebuild them when increasingly intense and frequent storms hit, which is why private insurers don't want to keep having to deal with that anymore, and the costs are handed off to taxpayers. When all the economic indicators that take the highest priority in Americans' heads are now in such volatile motion thanks to climate change, it may be time to reconsider how traditional economics work and how we perceive their effects. It's no longer a time when extreme weather was rare and more predictable. Its force and reasoning aren't beyond our capacity to aptly monitor, but they're certainly more difficult to track. You can't stretch out the easiest economic model to fix that, and you can't keep ignoring the clear links between our current weather hellscape, climate change, and our everyday goods. Thankfully, some actors are finally, belatedly, taking a new approach. The reinsurance company Swiss Re has acknowledged that its industry fails to aptly factor disaster and climate risk into its calculations and is working to overhaul its equations. Advances in artificial intelligence, energy intensive though it may be, are helping to improve extreme weather predictions and risk forecasts. At the state level, insurers are pushing back against local policies that bafflingly forbid them from pricing climate risk into their models. And Florida has new legislation requiring more transparency in the housing market around regional flooding histories. New York legislators are attempting to ban insurers from backstopping the very fossil fuel industry that contributed to so much of their ongoing crisis. After all, we're no longer in a world where climate change affects the economy, or where voters prioritizing economic or inflationary concerns are responding to something distinct from climate change. We're in a world where climate change is the economy. Great article from Wired from Nitish Awa. This from the Washington Post. Climate change is already making your bills more expensive. Researchers warn the hazards will only get worse for the planet and the economy. No one in our subreddit Costco, the Reddit group dedicated to the beloved bulk store, could get over it. The hefty store brand olive oil bottles they have been purchasing for years, the ones they agreed were the best and cheapest around, suddenly cost twice as much what they used to. Olive oil insanity, one commenter wrote in the fall. Why is olive oil so expensive? Another demanded in March. Popping prices for a pantry staple might seem like another example of hard to digest inflation, but economists say there could be another culprit behind certain price spikes, one that will only become more influential in the coming years: climate change. That's especially the case when every month so far this year has been the hottest ever. June, marked by a sweltering heat wave for much of its country, seems likely to set another record. In March, a study from scientists at the European Central Bank and the Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research found that rising temperatures could add as much as 1.2 percentage points to annual global inflation by 2035. The effects are already taking shape already. Drought in Europe is devastating olive harvest. Heavy rains and extreme heat in West Africa are causing cocoa plants to rot. Wildfires, floods, and more frequent weather disasters are pushing insurance costs up too. As human-generated greenhouse gas emissions wreak planetary chaos, researchers forecast even more economic effects, driving temporary price increases and raising risk for longer-term inflation, especially as spikes become more frequent. Soaring temperatures will create unbearable conditions for crops and workers. Severe storms and prolonged droughts will batter supply chains and disrupt the flow of trade. Escalating risk and uncertainty will make it more difficult to insure everything from a home to a new business venture. These are really big effects, and they are going to get worse, said Max Kotz, a climate economist at the Potsdam Institute and lead author of the March study. The clearest way we can limit it is just trying to limit climate change itself. For now, experts say it's difficult to pinpoint climate change's effect on prices beyond a few items. Too many other factors are also pushing costs up right now, including wars and supply chains. But there is little doubt among economists that a hotter world will also be more expensive. In the grocery aisle. This year, the global price of olive oil hit an all-time high, according to data from the International Monetary Fund. Also, the olive trees in Gaza are playing a huge role. Experts say that the benchmark is inextricably linked to another unwelcome superlative. 2023 was Europe's second hottest year on record. In early 2023, warm winter conditions interfered with trees' ability to set fruit. When summer brought temperatures of 110 degrees Fahrenheit, the few olives that grew dropped off the vine before ripening. Scorched air sapped moisture from vegetation and soils, plunging much of the continent into drought and causing plants to wither and die. Such high temperatures, which in some cases would have been virtually impossible without human-caused climate change, studies show, helped cut the region's olive production to almost half of the typical levels, according to the U.S. Department of Agriculture. Because the European Union produces more than 60% of the world's olive oil, that shortage made itself felt at grocery stores around the planet and among Costco fans on Reddit. Of all the goods that could be affected by climate-driven price spikes, food is among the most vulnerable, Kotz said. Plants lose more water through their leaves, stop forming flowers and fruit, and eventually are unable to perform photosynthesis. That's a heat stroke in a plant. Crops, livestock, and fisheries are keenly sensitive to change in their environments. Sea creatures have been known to cook to death in heat waves. See here, this cocoa beans and olive oil skyrocketing. Often, producers can work around weather-induced price changes, minimizing the effects for consumers, but those adaptation strategies will become less effective as the consequences of climate change become more frequent and severe, said agricultural economist Jerry Nelson, a professor emeritus at the I can't say that word right now, at the University of Illinois. He pointed to cocoa, which also hit record high prices this year, as a crop that could be highly vulnerable to future temperature rise. Most cocoa plants are genetically very similar, which means they are less likely to exhibit mutations that help them cope with changing environmental conditions. That's why monocrop raising and giant, massive monocrop like plantations is always a bad idea, because of disease, anything, just run right through it all. It's all the same. The International Panel on Climate Change, a UN coalition of the world's top climate scientists, projects that disasters will increasingly strike multiple agricultural regions at the same time, creating worldwide shortages. One study found that the risk of simultaneous crop failures in major corn-growing regions could increase from a 6% chance per year in recent decades to 40% if the world warms to 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial temperatures, a threshold the planet is likely to exceed within the next decade. Still, it's hard to predict the precise economic consequences, Nelson said, because food prices are affected by factors other than supply. We can model the site of crops and changing climate regimes around the world. Sociology. Population, income, cultural preferences. There are all these demand changes also going on, which are really not in any of the models. But studying the behavior of food prices during extreme events helps researchers begin to tease out the link between climate change and grocery bills. For their study, Kotz and his colleagues plotted changes in consumer price indexes in 121 countries against monthly temperatures data for the past 3 decades. After adjusting for other factors, global recessions, conflicts within countries, they found that every 1 degree Celsius increase in temperature of a given month, food price inflation would increase about 0.2% over the course of the following year. By 2035, the study found climate change could boost annual food price inflation by as much as 3.2%, a figure that exceeds the 2% overall inflation target set by many central banks, including the U.S. Federal Reserve, where officials are still struggling to control prices after 2 years of elevated interest rates. From the perspective of a central banker, that's a really large pressure, Kotz said. The cost of staying insured. California New Business Update flashed in red at the top of State Farm General Insurance Company's press release last year. The insurance giant would stop accepting new homeowner insurance applications in the Golden State, citing rapidly growing catastrophe exposure as the top reason, alongside high construction costs and a challenging reinsurance market. We take seriously our responsibility to manage risk, the company wrote, and gave a nod to the state's efforts to mitigate wildfire losses. It's necessary to take these actions now to improve the company's financial strength. For many, California is a cautionary tale as weather disasters nationwide become more intense, more frequent, and more expensive. Spring 2023, for example, was the worst second quarter for losses on homeowner insurance since 2011, due in large part to storms, according to Tim Zawacki, insurance sector strategist at S&P Global Market Intelligence. Catastrophe claims were also particularly high in May after a relative benign first 4 months of the year. You wouldn't expect elevated catastrophe losses each year, Zawacki said, but over any given 5 or 10-year period, you would expect bad quarters or years to occur more frequently than they would have in the past. That's something companies are constantly adjusting for their rate-setting processes. Exposure to climate hazards is a strong predictor in how much auto insurance will cost, said Shannon Martin, an analysis in the personal finance site Bankrate.com, who previously worked as an insurance agent for 16 years. Living in a place prone to hurricanes, wildfires, or floods raises the risk of your car being damaged or destroyed in a disaster. It also increases the chance of accidents or roads deteriorating faster. Ultimately, the biggest drivers of insurance prices spikes are the events that companies do not predict, Martin said. When unexpectedly large numbers of people file claims in the wake of a disaster, which is happening more often as climate change scrambles weather patterns and fuels new extremes, insurers will raise rates to recoup those losses. Since there's no real end in sight to what extreme weather is going to look like, there's no prediction of when increasing insurance rates will slow down, Martin said. Consequences for global trade. A global part of the world's vast trade system relies on a smooth route through the Panama Canal. A streamlined system of locks and elevators keeps the waterway moving, and with it, cargo ships full of cars, grains, coal, and more. Normally, about 1,000 ships pass through each month, toting over 40 million tons of goods, or 5% of global maritime trade volumes, according to the IMF. But the 50-mile strip has faced the worst drought since completion 110 years ago. Low water levels at Gatun Lake, which makes passage through the canal impossible, prompted authorities to significantly restrict the number of ships starting last fall. Typically, around 35 or 40 ships might pass through the canal each day, but the first few months of 2024 saw that number drop to the high teens or low 20s. Daily passage has recovered to roughly 30 ships. Those figures have been big implications for the volume of goods moving through the canal. Last summer, roughly 1.4 million metric tons passed through each day. That number steadily fell by early 2024 to below 1 million, although it has mostly recovered since. Supply chains are complicated, so it's near impossible to tease out the implications of reduced canal traffic on prices. Even climate change's fingerprints are hard to pinpoint. A recent analysis from researchers in Panama and Europe found that high demand from expanding cities and the drying effects of a recent El Nino weather pattern were likely big drivers. But Ayman Omar, a professor at American University, said the situation in Panama is emblematic of the kinds of crises that will increasingly hit supply chains as the planet warms and disasters intensify. Any event, hurricane, food, heat, might have only a marginal effect on the cost of a car hauled on a container ship. But when multiple events happen at the same time, we are not set up right now to be able to take all of these hits, Omar said. The Port Watch Tracker came to be because climate shocks are only becoming more frequent, said Michel Ruta, an economist and trade expert at the IMF. He pointed to a seminal 2010 study tracking the effects of delay times on trade. Researchers found that every day of delay cut trade by more than 1%. Everything adds on. The implications on the Marco side inflation, Ruta said. In Panama, some shippers have paid multi-million-dollar fees for dwindling numbers of transit slots through the canal. Others have opted for a much longer voyage around South America, which also raises costs. We're going to see this happening for many climate-based issues, whether it's heat, whether it's floods, Omar said. Even if it's not impacting your components and production, it's impacting your transportation and distribution. Sooner or later, the availability goes down and the cost goes up. Long term, this is the reality. I don't mean to have all the articles be so gloomy. That's what we have for today. There's also a few wildfires to note, but nothing major right now. This is an article of dengue fever. There's been 4,500 deaths in Brazil. This is shaping up to be a pandemic sweeping across the globe. Evacuation warnings orders issued as fires threaten homes in Fresno County. Evacuation warnings has been issued as crews work to get control of 2 wildfires that broke out in Fresno County on Monday. First fire, which authorities are now calling the Flash Fire, started around 3 p.m. on East Kings Canyon Road near Cove Avenue. The Flash Fire has since grown to 485 acres and is currently 0% contained. Firefighters are also battling the Bolt Fire in the area of the Palomino Drive and Elwood Road, which is near Wonder Valley Ranch and Resort. The Bolt Fire has burned through 250 acres of grass and is 0% contained. More than 100 firefighters from all over the valley are working to contain the Bolt Fire. The Fresno County Sheriff's Office has issued evacuation warnings for Clark Valley, Harmon Peak, and Tredden Canyon due to the fires. Speaking of Brazil, state of emergency declared in Mato Grosso do Sul due to Pantanal fire. A lot of fires going on, a lot of heat. I thank you for your time. I thank you for liking the stream, subscribing to the channel, keep me motivated in putting out climate-related videos like this on YouTube. If you are interested in these stories, curating that climate change in this one great planet, please like the stream, subscribe to the channel. It helps keep me motivated. I had a format change where I go live every day at 5:30 p.m. Eastern, 5:30 p.m. Eastern. Instead of going live 2 or 3 times a day like I was being before, and that was becoming draining on myself and on my subscribers as updates would constantly bury content. This way I get everything in and I don't have to worry about bothering people with a bunch of notifications that are constantly like updating 3 times a day. You know, after a week, my content is completely buried. Not even a week, 3 days, 4 days it was. So this way, we can get in more information, we can get in more articles, and we can take our time, dissect the articles, dissect what we're looking at here. Bird flu detected at another Victorian farm. This is a H7 strain, not the H5 strain. I thank you very much for your time. Please, if you haven't already, like the stream, subscribe to the channel. Ever since YouTube indefinitely suspended my ads account due to shocking content, you heard that right, I made a Patreon. I would very much appreciate for you to even just go on my Patreon and click the free membership. The tier is free. It helps me get an idea of my community that I'm creating here. And there is also a $5 a month tier, which if you appreciate what I'm doing here, if you understand what I'm doing here, and you check back in here every day, I would greatly appreciate your patronage. I don't know if somebody said that before, patronage, like patronage, you know? I'll work on it. I'll workshop it. Thank you very much. I think that is everything that I have for today. And once again, we'll take a look at this. Rapidan Dam. That whole house went in. Terrible news. That erosion is not going to stop anytime soon and is going to continue. A lot of trees are going to be taken out, but trees can be replanted. If you take a tree out of the ground, you can replant it. It's not dead. It takes a while for a tree to be dead, especially when it's surrounded, when it's buried in water. Trees can be replanted if they are uprooted, depending on how they're uprooted. All right. Thank you very much for your time. I do appreciate your time. Thank you very much. I am going to call the stream here. I thank you very much for your time. I know I repeat myself constantly. It is more of a tick. I seem to not be able to help it as often as I'd like, but that's okay. As long as I'm not being a nuisance, repeating the same things over and over, I think I should be okay. Because I can get stuck in a loop. Severe ADHD, severe OCD, and really get stuck in a loop and go over and over and over again. To the point that, you know, I just lose track of what I'm doing. Like, I'm doing it not, and it just keeps getting worse. But that's all I have for today. I thank you again. Please take care. Thank you again. Please take care. Let's see, what else do I have? I know I keep going back and forth. I feel like there was something that I wanted to talk about today. CommonDreams.org. Dangerous precedent. Record APAC spending helps George Latimer defeat Jamal Bowman. Democrats sponsored our sponsored a MAGA candidate in George Latimer. Jamal and our movements were such a threat to right-wing power to got mega donors and AIPAC's influence in Congress that they had to spend $15 million to defeat us, said one progressive organizer. Progressive Representative Jamal Bowman lost his re-election bid in New York's 16th congressional district on Tuesday to an establishment-backed county official whose campaign was propelled by nearly $15 million in spending by AIPAC's Republican-funded super PAC. $15 million. $15 million to beat Jamal Bowman. Jamal Bowman, whatever you might think of him, this is a strange story, as Hillary Clinton also, not sponsored, I can't think of the word right now, chooses a candidate. Democrats chose George Latimer, even though that he's clearly a MAGA nutter. Hillary Clinton sponsored a MAGA nutter over a progressive Jamal Bowman. Not right. Bowman still had a lot of work to do. And George Latimer is going to be an awful candidate. He's going to be an awful, awful person in Congress because he's an awful person before he came in Congress. You know what it means when I say he's MAGA? He's extreme right wing. This is no joke. We're losing people that actually do work for our country. Instead, we get people that are planted there because they don't like who currently in the seat, even though it's a Democrat still. $15 million buys you a lot of people. If progressives can just get wiped out by money, money is not hard to come by for these people. We're talking about billionaires, corporations that are funding millions and millions of dollars in elections. They're trying to sway to right wing. Not right. Money can buy anything, including a seat in the House. It is a dangerous precedent. And the people that we don't want to hear are censored by losing a primary. %58 to 42%. Shame. What can you do? Gotta just vote him out. All right. Thank you again for watching. Please take care.